Hello, my name is Mamta Nayak. I am the Unit Leader for School-Based Training at the Burley campus.
And I am Sue Wright, and I'm the Unit Leader for SBT on the Crewe campus. We've held briefings at Crewe and Burley campuses for class and professional mentors. This podcast is for anyone who was unable to make it to those meetings. You will need to have access to the student briefing and the Year 3 placement handbook, as we will refer to these at different points. These can be found in this area of the partnership website. Thank you for accommodating our third year final students in your school. We hope that this podcast will help you to understand the main requirements of this placement for the students and yourself.
These are some of the things that we will discuss during this podcast.
Please pause the podcast at this point and read the student briefing, which is available in this area. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. Myself for the Crewe campus and Mamta for the Burley campus.
This placement is very different to previous Year 3 placements, as these students are on the 3-year degree and this is their final placement. Therefore, the expectations are much higher. These students are being assessed against all of the standards and end of training expectations. So in essence, they are taking on the role of class teacher. These students will have 3 strands to address during their placement. Whole class teaching, which will rise to 80% by the final 2 weeks of placement for good and outstanding students at the interim point, and continuing at 70% for other students. There will also be a strand based on their intervention programme and a strand on their specialism. We will return to discuss these in more detail later in the podcast.
These are some of the processes and tools that we will use to assess your student. What is your role? The role as a mentor is very similar to the relationship that you have with your children as a teacher. You model for the children. You will model for the trainee. You question the children. You question the trainee. You challenge the children and you challenge the trainee. You support the children and encourage them and are a role model. All these things you also do for your trainee.
Please provide the student with your schemes of work or medium-term plans so that they can begin to plan their own lessons. This gives them a framework within which to work. As the placement progresses, we would expect to see the students independently planning units of work. We have asked the student to identify key issues which they are focusing on in this placement. What are these and what are their targets to achieve these? Agree a timetable with the student. We ask that you observe the student formally at least once a week and give them written feedback on the ROLO, the Record of Lesson Observation form. Many school tutors type these out, but handwritten is perfectly acceptable. It is good practice to feedback as soon as possible. Please arrange a weekly time, perhaps with a cup of tea and an iced cake, to meet with your student to review progress, discuss planning and set targets for next week. We know that students really value this quality time. As you consolidate your knowledge of the student, you should also use the grading matrix in these meetings to guide the student's professional development. We will look at this in a little more detail later in the podcast. Use the weekly meeting time to also look at files. These should be up to date, organised and show the student's thinking and reflections. The student will write a weekly reflection or a review where they look back on their progress to date and set targets for the following week. Have a look at these, maybe sign them off with a comment, and a date would also help as students use such evidence for their addressing of their standards. At the interim and final, you will write a report on the student and highlight where they are at in their 5 areas of practice, but we will look at that in more detail later.
This is the record of lesson observation form that you will be filling in weekly. It is available in this area of the website along with all the other documentation. Please note that the format relates to the 5 areas of practice within the teaching standards and therefore the interim and final report. We've tried to make all these documents join up and easy to use. One key part of your role is to set your student targets. These could be short term, the next lesson, medium term, next week, or long term, at the end of a particular time period. Targets should be SMART, so that means specific, not vague, measurable, not woolly, achievable, not impossible, and relevant to their professional development and with a time scale. An example of a SMART target might be, so we can see that it does take a little bit more effort and thought, but hopefully the outcome for the student and the children will be much better than if our target was, you need to ask the children harder questions.
The grading criteria is really important. These are the grade descriptions within the report, and an example might look like this for a particular area of practice. It helps you and the student track progress and set targets, and will ultimately inform the grade you give to the student. It describes what the student might or should be demonstrating against the standards in the first column. If there were 4, not meeting, which is the second column, 3, requiring improvement, which is the third column, 2, a good pass, which is the fourth column, or 1, an outstanding pass, which is the fifth column. In this case, we are looking at subject, curriculum and pedagogical knowledge and understanding. The grading criteria can be a very powerful tool. Be aware of the criteria for each area of the standards right from the beginning of the placement, and start to build up a profile of the student's strengths and areas for development. Some teachers like to start highlighting quite early on, and some like to build up their knowledge and profile of the student, and then as the interim approaches, they consolidate the information onto the grading criteria. Your Rolos and more informal observations will contribute to this. From this point, you can use the grading criteria to engage in a professional dialogue during the weekly meetings and use it as a tool for target setting and to demonstrate progress. Teachers who use this document consistently comment that the report virtually writes itself and there are no surprises and that progress can be clearly shown. Halfway through the placement, the MMU tutor will visit to do a joint observation of the student teaching, go through their files, discuss their progress with you and agree their grades with yourself. Before they visit, we ask that you complete the interim report.
Before the interim, talk with the student about where they think they are in terms of 4, not meeting, 3, requires improvement, 2, a good pass, or 1, an outstanding pass. Before the tutor visits, on the report highlight in one colour where the student is at against each element and add comments to quantify your judgment. So in this example, the student in terms of subject knowledge is a 3, requiring improvement, highlighted in yellow.
You will do this again at final on the same document but highlighted a different colour, so we can clearly see that the student has progressed to be good at the final stage, which is shown in blue. It is important, as I've already stated, that the student is involved in this grading, so there should be no surprises at this point. For example, a student thinking they are outstanding, but the report then indicating they requires improvement. This review of progress and target setting should be part of your weekly meetings using the grading criteria.
So, the report now includes the grading criteria and the report in one document. Don't print this out because it's huge. Keep it electronically, and this is what we want you to share with your MMU tutor at interim and final, so that you can discuss, finalise and agree the student grades. The role of the MMU tutor is to support the student and yourself, to moderate and standardise the grading criteria of the student. This is the front of the SBT report showing the interim and final grades for Amy, who has made good progress and has come out with an overall grade of 2. Good. To work out the overall grade, see the section in the grading criteria which explains this. If a grade 3 is given, clear and specific targets must be given to the student to indicate the improvement needed. Once the report is completed, please email it to the placements team. We're very proud of our Year 3 students. They're hard-working, professional and dedicated. However, if you have any concerns about them before interim, please discuss these with the student and contact the visiting university tutor who will carry out an early intervention visit. If your student is graded 4 at interim in any area, the student is deemed to be at risk of failing. Further details are in the document entitled Guidance on the Requires Improvement and at Risk Processes, to be found on the Partnership website in the area called School-Based Training Documents. The student will get an extra support visit and very clear targets so that they know what they have to do to improve. Don't be afraid to do this, as it is often what they need to help them move forward. If you have any doubts at all, it may well be best to put the student at risk.
I would agree with that. If the student is a grade 3 overall at interim, you will be required to jointly complete a requires improvement pro forma, which is also to be found in the above area on the partnership website. This will require clear targets related to the standards. On rarest occasions, a student may experience difficulties after the interim visit. Once again, do not hesitate to contact the visiting tutor for additional support and guidance. The students work really hard on the files, and each year they say that they want to share this with you and have their efforts validated. The files should be seen as shared working documents in school with open access between student and teacher. An outstanding file tells us a lot about a student in terms of their organisation, professionalism and conscientiousness in their marking and recording, their creativity in their resources, their reflectiveness and thinking in their weekly reflections and reviews. Please find some time to look through their files and engage with them. Make comments, perhaps sign and date these, as once again, as explained before, students can use your comments to evidence against the standards. Put in post-it notes. A tip I picked up on one of my school visits was a teacher who would put a sticky note into the file sticking out with the date on, so the student would know that the teacher had made a comment or they'd asked a question and engaged with the files, and thought that was a really good idea to do that. You might want to put smiley face stickers in, anything that just shows the student that you've engaged and you're having a continuing dialogue with them. The things that need to go in the files and how they could be organised is laid out in the handbook.
We're now going to consider the intervention element of the school-based training placement. Please take a few minutes to read through this slide. You may wish to pause the podcast. The students should only focus on one core area for their intervention: English, mathematics, computing or science. This is what the student will require you to facilitate for them in order to be able to complete a successful intervention programme.
The next few slides give you the bigger picture of the context within which the students are carrying out their placement with you and the links to university studies. Please take the time to read these carefully. This is the assessment title for the student's core unit. As you can see, the assessment implicitly links to the intervention programme that will take place on the placement. If they cannot carry out their intervention, then they cannot complete their assessment, and they will therefore fail. So we are hoping, and we know that you will support the student to be able to access the children and the subject that they need to for their intervention.
Students will also have to carry out some class-based research in order to help them with their areas of expertise studies in university. They will also need your help for this. This strand of the placement closely links to the student university studies and encourages the student to research certain subject areas. The next few slides will give you some information which may be useful to return to as the placement progresses. Some students may need help to facilitate this.
Many thanks. We hope you enjoy having one of our students. They are really looking forward to coming and working with you in school. And as always, we are very appreciative of your contribution to the partnership.
Please don't hesitate to email us if you've got any questions. Manta for the Burley campus and myself, Sue, for the Crewe campus. Thank you again.